Hey, what's up out there? It's Dave Duford here at Final Expense Agent Mentor, where I help agents like you succeed in selling life insurance, no matter what it is that you're selling, life insurance or just plain old insurance. And in today's video, I am hopefully going to educate you on how to close your insurance deals. If you've been following my recent live stream series, I've been talking about my 4-step process to sell insurance, no matter what it is that you're selling, to give you a path to run on, from how to open up a conversation with your prospect, to pre-qualify them, then present to them, eventually, where we are now, to close them. So this is the 4th part and final part to the sales training that I teach insurance agents in this business. And we'll conclude with this by closing. Now, there's kind of some interesting perspectives on closing. Of course, you can see the brass balls that I've got in my thumbnail if you clicked and watched that. And you probably recall the reference from Glengarry Glen Ross. And of course, Alec Baldwin talks about always be closing. And you should always be closing. Why closing is the most important. The inference is it's the most important element of the sales process. Of course, I don't think that is the case, and I'm going to make my case. I'm going to try to close you on that thought process in this video, throughout it, describing why I think closing is the least important part. But it is important, but you've got to set up the sale the correct way so that closing isn't something as big of a deal as it's made out to be. I'm going to explain to you why that perspective predominates, and really what actual salespeople who do insurance sales for a living realize that closing is not all that important. It's important, but it's not as big of a deal as the trainers and people out there proclaim it to be. We're also going to talk about some other aspects of how to present whatever it is that you're selling. The only close that you really need, you don't need to memorize a million different closes. And that may alter or change depending on what you're selling. If I remember to mention that, I'll kind of give you some alterations if what you're selling isn't necessarily a new product. Maybe you're doing a replacement sale. We'll cover that as well. Then we'll talk about how to cool down policy delivery, referral generation. And then we're going to talk about, of course, something we all handle, which is objections, and a process I'm going to give you as to how to rebuttal those objections, no matter what they may be. So, let me kind of start from the beginning. I think it's interesting to talk about this because it dawned on me that, from a cultural standpoint, what is it? Does life imitate art, or does art imitate life, right? So we look at Hollywood and we see, people in Hollywood portray images of groups of people in a stereotypical way. And all too common, the portrayal isn't necessarily true. Maybe a stereotype, maybe there's a grain of truth to it, but it isn't necessarily the core truth of the matter. I think we can all agree that, not everybody from the South is an inbred hick, let's say, for an example. There are actually normal people everywhere. And, sorry, got a fly flying around here. And so my point is that extends to other things too, as well as with sales. And it dawned on me, especially early on in my sales business, that the perception that Hollywood gives of a salesperson is a snake oil salesman, some guy who comes up to you and won't leave you alone, wants you to buy this thing. And then when you do, they screw you out of something. And they're out to get you. They're bad guys. They're not to be trusted. This is the lowest form of life that you can be as a salesperson. And I think while there's a grain of truth to that, it gives a perception to the average person, especially the one that wants to get into sales, that what they're doing is somehow bad, or it's a bad thing. And I bring this up because what you'll realize is if you stick with this business long enough and you get out there and recognize that, people don't like to be sold, but they love to buy. And if you learn how to sell where you can be an assistant buyer versus a high-pressure salesperson, you'll find you create a lot more solid relationships and people truly appreciate what you have to bring to the table. And the reason I'm bringing all this up is, and why this relates to closing, is because Hollywood makes closing out like it is the core aspect of what selling is for. Certainly we've got to ask for the sale. But what isn't really talked about, and possibly because it's not what Hollywood understands, is that a sale is much more intricate and detailed than just asking for the business. It comes down to asking for the business, but there's a lot of romance. There's a lot of action before the actual inception of the deal, right? If you've paid attention to my other videos, you know that you've got to build a foundation of an introduction. You got to develop a little bit of a rapport or friendliness. You got to pre-qualify your prospects to make sure if they're a high odds buyer or not. You got to make sure that the presentation you give establishes that your product is a great solution relative to the other ones out there, all while you're overcoming objections that are already, that may not have manifested, that would have if you didn't do all this. So this comes to the point that the close, when you get to this point in the sales call, if you follow the directions that I teach, the close should be very natural. It shouldn't be some high pressure buildup that they're not expecting, that you're kind of coy and actually delivering. It should be a natural, which one of these works best for you. Why? Because you spent all this time building up to this point where the rubber meets the road, determining if this person is actually pre-qualified, if they meet your criteria to buy, and if they're a high odds buyer, okay? And the problem with closing is that closing, used to be, there's a book I read where it showed, if you think of a pyramid and then an inverted pyramid, closing was at the foundation to the traditional selling model back in the 20s to 50s. And then things changed, I guess the selling process became more sophisticated, and then the pyramid flipped over. The selling process was the least important, the closing process was the least important. And so what happens is I don't think that there's been an accurate portrayal of what a salesperson really, a good one, does, which is build value, which is create a connection, which is solve problems or solution-oriented versus pressure-oriented. And so if you sell the right way, the closing is so natural because, and it's expected. By this point, your client is probably going to buy 9 out of 10 times if you follow the prior steps that I teach. So I say all this because I just don't believe, and based on how I've trained hundreds of agents, I've personally sold out in the field, I just don't think you need to know, 20 different objection rebuttals. You don't need to you don't have to take no 5 or 6 or 7 times. That's stupid. It's stupid. I've never done that in my career. I've sat with over 3,000 people and presented final expense, not to mention all the personal training sales I did prior to that. I've never had to overcome more than 1 or 2 no's if there was a deal. And so I think that traditional model, if you've been trained on that, hopefully this will be a relief. If you're brand new to the business, this is great because you don't have all this prior head baggage that you have to overcome, because closing is not high pressure. Closing is easy. It's all about fixing whatever problem they have, the prospect has. And throughout this entire process, you're at this point only because you know they've got a problem. You know that they have an emotional need and a desire for it. They've got a bank account, they've got a budget, whatever your criteria are. And this process should be super smooth and super easy. So enough with the setup here. So let's kind of get right into it. So at this point, if you go back to just the last one, which is the last video I did on this was presenting your solution, step 3 of the 4-part sales series. You know that what we talked about is we've compared and contrasted what we do in our product versus our competition. That's the kind of work you're going to have to put in to figure out who your competition is and then show how yours compares to theirs and why yours is an advantage and not. I'm assuming you actually sell something that's pretty good. It's a good value for the client. If you're selling snake oil or some junk, well, I can't help you there. So this presumes you got something that's decent quality that has some unique selling propositions. So you got to set yourself up to create the contrast, because what people want is they want to know what they're buying makes sense on certain terms and is better compared to something else, so they can establish in their own mind that it's a quality product. And they've agreed to you that your product, out of the selection you've described to them, or the alternatives you've described to them, is a better deal. So you're at this point, you've trial closed them, they conceptually have bought into what you have. And now it's time to present the solution. So a couple of steps here, really. Again, this is a slippery slope, not slippery slope, a greased chute. It should be really effortless at this point. So at this point, I present to them the product that I'm going to show them. I show them a brochure. So if I take this into the realm of life insurance, I'll say, well, here's the policy that I can qualify for. Here's the company I qualify for. It's XYZ Life Insurance Company. They're out of Fargo, North Dakota. They've been in business since 1888, and they're an A-plus ranked company by the AM Best company. It just means that they're highly financially strong. I personally don't spend a lot of time building up the company, okay? Anybody who sold life insurance for any period of time, it's amazing. We literally go into complete strangers' homes, and an hour later, we've sold them a policy that they probably weren't necessarily expecting to buy from us. They felt like maybe we got to feel me out first before we do this. And from a company they probably never heard before that. It's crazy. And so these people are buying from companies that they don't know of, that have no brand name. And why do they do that? It's because they're sold on me, all right? They're going to be sold on you. So I don't like to get down and get too much into minutia of a company and looking at the financials. Maybe that's something you would do at a higher level product. But I still think the 80-90% of what matters is your connection with your client, the trust and the rapport you've built with them. So therefore, this is just kind of to the side. It's not as big of a deal as it is to sell yourself. So that's all I spent. I said, this is a company you can qualify for, blah, blah, blah. Here's the reason I'm recommending them. So I always want to include the language, here's why I'm recommending them to you. And what I want to do is to hit the high notes of what they talked about earlier on in the pre-qualification stage. So let's talk about somebody who wanted to, let's say, buy a Medicare policy. They've got a Medicare supplement right now. You ask them a question of, what do you like about your policy? Well, I love that it covers everything. I don't have to worry about anything but to cover the premium. But then you also asked, what do you like least about your Medicare supplement? I hate this price increase I've had to pay 3 times. It's crazy. I like the company a lot, but this is just ridiculous. I've never had to use it. So these are hot button items that you need to use, that you probably use if you presented correctly, but you definitely need to use as you're getting ready to close and wrap up this deal. So how would I use that information? So I'd say, so here's the company I can qualify for your Medicare supplement. Just like you said earlier, this plan is a Plan F. This plan covers absolutely everything that we discussed. You pay the premium just the same way that you have been. You don't have to worry about any excess bills or this altering the kind of coverage you got right now, because remember, we covered in the Medicare book that these products are standardized, they're identical. And the other good news is that unlike what you're doing right now, paying for a very high premium after all these price increases, which you're very frustrated about, right? This one is going to come in instead of $200 a month at $120 a month. You're literally going to save $1,000 a month. So in this case, what I would say is, again, I'm using that information that I collected, and that's just for Medicare. Look, if it's life insurance or burial insurance, or if it's disability or anything, mortgage protection, anything you're selling, a lot of the language and closing tactics you use, you got to think and listen to what they said earlier, because they're going to tell you emotional hot buttons, and you need to hit those hot buttons at all aspects of the sales call when it's relevant. And this is where it's really relevant, because you're summarizing everything to drive home to that final home run, or that run for the home base. So what I do is I hit the high notes so that they know and we're reminded that why they're doing this, why this is good for them. Now, to the close. So the close will depend on what kind of product you're selling. If you're selling a Medicare supplement, it still kind of applies. I'm a big believer that the only close you really need to know is an alternate close, an alternate option close. So here's how that works. So I don't want to ask them, of course, Do you want to buy a plan from me? Yes or no. That's a yes or no product. Okay, hopefully by now we all have the basic understanding. You don't ask binary questions, yes, no questions. We ask assumed questions where the outcome is a sale either way. It's just a matter of which one works best for the client. So if I'm selling a life insurance product, for example, what I'll do is I'll say, here's my so here's a plan, here's how it works, here's why I'm recommending it to you. You know, you're telling me you have COPD. This is one of only a few companies that offers coverage, first day full coverage for COPD at a reasonable rate, whereas others will make you wait 2 years or more. So this is a really good deal. So here are the prices based on what you told me earlier about your budget. So remember, again, I've already asked them about budget. So I show them, 3 different options, 2 or 3, really 3 at most. I wouldn't go any more than 4, 2 or 3 at most, where I'm showing them a good, better, best type of setup. So let's say they told me their budget, if I was selling life insurance, was $60 to $80 a month. I would show them a $60 a month, a $70 a month, and then an $80 a month, and then the corresponding face amount. If you don't have the setup to solve for premium, then just do approximate amounts within that budget. So what this gives them the ability to do is have choice, right? So we provide them an option that they told us they could afford, and we give them the option to make a choice. So the customer doesn't feel pressured, right? Because we're confining ourselves within the boundaries that they gave us, right? And we're presenting something to them. Of course, we're going to assume they're going to buy. And then what I recommend to you is that as the salesperson, as when you're presenting this, I'll say, here's the options that you have. You gave me permission to show you somewhere between $60 and $80 a month. You can see here's the 60, 70, and 80. Here's what you always got to make. You got to make your recommendation. Okay, remember, you're a professional salesperson. You know a lot more about products at this point than they do. And they're looking for your advice on what to buy a lot of the times because they're uncertain. So give them certainty. You have that position to do so. Here's a script. My recommendation, Mr. Jones, is to blank. So here's the deal. So you could do, my recommendation is to pick the one that fits best for your budget. I do that a lot when I sell final expense. Or you can make it more substantive than that. Let's say they want to be buried, but the budget, you've got 60, 70, and 80, and only the 80 is going to cover enough to cover an average burial. Okay, and if they get a 60 or 70, they're looking at probably having to come out of pocket for more. I would recommend, hey, look, Mr. Jones, if this fits your budget, I recommend the $80 a month price. And here's why. You want to be buried, okay? But you can see the 60 and 70 aren't going to cut it. It's well below what the average cost for burial is. So if you want to ensure that your family has enough coverage, let's go with the $80 a month plan. What do you think? So something like that, okay? So I'll direct them to that and give them that advice. Again, this is important that you do this. And you always make the recommendation in an honest, sincere way, okay? Don't try to wrap this up to always get the higher priced option. However, of course, any salesperson, including myself, if they pick the high option, I always think, maybe I should have showed more. But sometimes when they say that, it's like, is this all I can get? Can I get more? Oh, yeah, absolutely, Mr. Jones. So you want to show more. If you're selling a Medicare supplement, one other way to look at this is that you show them a Plan F, right, and what the savings are, and then maybe if you've built into your presentation talking about a Plan G, which is always less expensive, mostly always less expensive than a Plan F, you could show them the Plan G and then show some corresponding numbers on what total savings would be if they just stuck with the same exact kind of plan and how they'd save money that way. Or if they went to Plan G and even if they paid their annual Part B deductible, how they would still be ahead financially and how that's an advantage to them. So you could just do a 2-part close. I wouldn't show a Plan F, a Plan G, a Plan N, a Plan L, or Plan whatever, high deductible F. The more options you show a prospect who probably has a high chance of buying, the more confused you're going to make them be. Okay, so this is important. This is why we just do 2 or 3 and not 4, 5, 10. Because if you think of yourself, hey, Starbucks lets us choose what we want in our drink, how to do it, and make it customized. If you take that same process to a complicated product like life insurance or health insurance or whatever it is you're selling, you're going to present more uncertainty. What should I go with? Should I go with that? Should I go with this? Should I go with that? Let me think about this. And we all know when they say that, And if they convince you that they just need to think about it, they're just going to be putting the brakes on doing anything substantively. So prevent that by sticking with 2 or 3 options. And here's what you say after you make your recommendation. This is the closing statement. Which one works best for you? And most important, shut up. Let them be the next person to think. Now, why do we say shut up and don't talk? Pretty important here, because you've got to let your prospect mentally go through whatever they're thinking about in their mind to come to a conclusion. You have to understand, as the fascinating thing about selling is it is a duel of control, okay? Selling is all about, from the start to the finish, it's about who has control, who has the leverage, who is leading, who is following. And there's always this sparring that goes on between both parties, okay? And that process you don't want to lose control of. And one of the best ways to gain control and to do it in a way that's not high pressure is to be the one asking questions, okay? So pro tip here, guys, if you ask questions in a sales call, people can't help but to answer them, all right? If you want to direct somebody's thinking, ask questions. What do you think about this, Mr. Prospect? I'm not buying anything today. Knee-jerk objection. Hey, that's fine, Mr. Prospect. Well, what were your thoughts and concerns when you sent this card in? Well, they're moving past that, now focusing on the question I asked them. I promise you it works 99% of the time, which is enough to do it all the time. So in this reference, when we're asking them which one works best for you, we don't want to answer that for them or jump in and interject and try to change directions on the conversation. I'll give you a quick story here. So I had a ride-along once, and we were riding along. We did our second presentation today, something like that. And this guy was kind of just a wishy-washy dude. But, he was following along enough that I felt like he was pretty qualified. He met all the criteria of buying. And so when I presented the option to him, he sat back and just started thinking about it. And I just relaxed back, sat back, listened, let him think. He was just sitting there looking at it, looking at the numbers, being quiet. And you've got to be quiet. You've got to test your nerve. You cannot blow it by jumping in and saying, well, maybe we could do less. Because what will happen is they'll lose their train of thought, whatever they're thinking, and they'll begin to doubt the action. So it's a doubt taking action. So my ride-along client, big no-no, jumps in and says, well, wait a minute, maybe Dave can show you something that's a little bit different. Big no, all right? That, and he didn't buy. Turns out the guy didn't have a job. He lied to me, all right? He said he had a job, he had to work. There was something that I don't think anybody would have caught. But I don't think he would have bought. I guess that's my point. But still, the problem was that this person interjected at this point, and he lost his train of thought. And it was uncomfortable sitting there for it seemed like an eternity, maybe 2 minutes, to let them go through this process of thinking. And so anyways, long story short, don't do that. Take as much time as they need to think. I've tested salespeople before. I bought a Honda van like 4 or 5 years ago. And I like screwing with salespeople, and it's fun. I like buying stuff. And I sat quiet for, felt like 3 or 4 minutes. This guy was rock solid. I was proud of him. And of course, he got the sale. But yeah, you got to do that. Just shut your lips, watch TV, put your mind somewhere else, but don't talk. Let him think. Let him do what he needs to do to make the decision if he's actually going to buy or not. So once he comes to a decision, we'll get to objections and rebuttals at the end here because it's important to cover. Once he gets to the end, at that point, you say, great, I think that's a great idea. And the transition here is always some kind of transition. You want to transition, have a transitionary statement to filling out the application, preferably a statement that moves away from the pain of money being spent to the pleasure of solving a problem. So in life insurance sales, the best transitionary statement is, who do you want your beneficiary to be? Perfect, right? So it moves away from the pain of money being spent to the pleasure may not be the best word, but you get the idea, the satisfaction of Okay, I'm solving a problem. Here it is. So I definitely recommend that you do that. If you're doing Medicare, go grab your red, white, and blue card. Is great. That is a easy transitionary way to get the information to start to fill out the application. Just some basic rudimentary administrative stuff. Always make sure that you get everything signed. Take as much time, especially if you're new, to fill out the application. A lot of new agents will experience errors, missing signatures, forgetting to check boxes off, forgetting dates. Make sure you take your time to fill out this application. This is why e-apps exist. I am kind of a technological Luddite. I never really embraced technology until recently, and I love e-apps. They make life a lot easier because they eliminate a lot of these administrative requirements that lose a lot of deals. So make sure you take your time filling out the application. Make sure everything is signed appropriately. And then once you've sold the deal, what I recommend, a couple of things, is first of all, I recommend leaving a brochure behind with your card, and on the brochure write down the basic highlights of the plan. If you sold a life insurance plan, face amount per month, and if there's any riders or anything you're selling in addition, just a highlight of those. Not a big dissertation, not a 5-paragraph thing, but also write your name and your phone number on the brochure. Don't go uber detailed, okay? But make sure you cover the big, meaty chunk of it that really matters. So I leave that to them. I say, okay, here's just a summary of everything we talked about. Here's the amount of coverage you have. Here's the rate. Here's the details. So hold on to this. Then I tell them what to expect. The policy will probably get here in 2 to 3 weeks. If there's any problems, I'll call you, but you'll probably not hear from me because usually everything's fine after I leave, so don't worry about your policy. The first draft will come out for your policy on X date, blah, 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 blah. So just make sure they're on board with everything. Then ask them, hey, does everything sound good to you? Also, once you do that, then the next best thing you can do is move away into a cool down sequence. So a cool down sequence is 3 to 5 minutes where you talk about something other than what you just did. People generally remember emotions. They remember not facts, they remember emotions. So you want to leave on a positive note. You want them to think, that guy's a nice guy, I like him, he really helped me. Because they probably won't remember all the details of their policy, but they'll remember if they trusted you and liked you. So you want to leave on that note. I'm assuming you did the right job for your client, of course, but you want to leave on the right note in the sense that they feel that way, because that's what's going to matter, and that's the lasting impression that these people are going to have. So it's cool. So the last 2 points here before we get to handling objections is, what do you do about delivering a policy? That's a big question a lot of agents have. And then what do you do about referrals? There's kind of two dueling different parties on this. Do you deliver the policy personally, or do you have the company deliver it? There are top agents that do both. I just interviewed an agent named Russ. This guy is a killer when it comes to Medicare supplements. He delivers his policies. I know others that just have them sent. He hand delivers them, I should say. I personally always had them sent from the company. But the reason that agents deliver their policies is because it is another touch of this client, and it allows you the ability to solidify the sale, make sure there's no other questions that have popped up since then, and it also gives you an opportunity to ask for referrals, because maybe you ask for referrals right on the spot and they can't think of anything. Maybe you leave them and say, hey, if you get a chance, talk to your brother, sister, friend who has Medicare too, mention that I can do this for them, whatever, and when I come back, I'd like you to have a name or two for me or something like that. And then now you got another opportunity to swing at the plate. So, and they'll kind of be a little bit more open-minded at that because you're back again, you're helping them again. So a lot of agents like doing that. I think it works great. The reason I never did it is because in final expense, I was always so activity-driven that trying to chase down 10, sometimes 15 people a week to deliver policy is like a whole day's ordeal. And so I just spend the cool down making sure they're all done. Now, do I probably lose deals where I could have saved them? Absolutely. It's just a cost. It's just an opportunity cost thing you've got to measure for yourself. And then referrals. Some agents believe you shouldn't ask for referrals at the point of sale or at the end of the sale. Others believe that they're earned over time. I'm a big believer in asking for referrals after the sale. People are going to be thrilled about their purchase. They're going to be in the right state of mind, in the best state of mind to give you an idea of what to do or who may be interested. And look, referral generation is not a big deal. There's a lot of different techniques. I recommend watching a video on my channel. I interviewed a guy named Claude Whitaker. Excellent scripting, a very advanced approach. It's not advanced in the sense you can't do it if you're new, but a great look at how to do referral generation. I recommend watching. It's about an hour long, but if you implement his advice, I'll give you an example. He cold called for his first 80 to 100 sales, and then after that, he lived exclusively on referral-generated business. And he was selling vacuums, okay? So it's not like, vacuum salesmen are much better than insurance salesmen in the mind of a prospect. But he did it that way. So, and he tells everything in the video, and he's got a book that's $3 that goes into even more detail. But the important point I'll make about referrals is just ask for them, okay? Say, hey, look, are you happy with this plan? Do you like what it does? Great. And what I'd like you to do is, can you give me a name or two of a family or a friend that you think might be interested in this kind of product as well? Or anybody that's talked about life insurance. I like to be specific about who I mention, a brother, a sister, an old ex-husband, whatever. I mean, you'll find that too. But be specific. You got to imagine they're pulling the mental drawer out of their mind to pull files on people and think, is this person interested? No. So, and if they don't, no big deal. But just by asking, you're going to get a couple of referrals a week. It's amazing if you'll just ask. Again, nobody's expecting to just give you referrals. You have to ask for them. I love giving referrals. I try to give them out to anybody that I do business with or have a relationship with because those are the best people to sell to. And it's got that tacit connection where it's easier to get an appointment with somebody. So I give people's names all the time when I deal with people because I like helping business people out. It's just kind of who I am. But most people aren't like that. But it's because they just don't understand it. So you have to ask, okay? People just won't do it. You got to ask, okay? So you have to be closing there. So that's how you sell a product. Now, of course, I'm going to pull over here and see if there's been any... hey, Victor, how you doing? Thanks for joining me. If you guys have any questions at any time, feel free to pop in here. This is a quite lengthy training here, but hey, cool. It's useful. So at this point now, we're going to transition into handling objections. And so, again, if this is your first introduction to my strategy to selling insurance, I want you to take some relief that you probably won't hear a lot of objections once you get good at this process. And let me explain to you why. Objections happen because a prospect is not sold on a policy, all right? And if you do a survey of any product that's out there for sale, it can be a small type of sale, it can be an enormous type of sale. There are typically 3 to 5 major objections that you have to overcome in order to sell a policy. So, and intermixed in that are what we call conditions. So objections can be overcome, conditions cannot. Conditions have to be met. So what I mean by that is if I don't have somebody who has no bank account, I'm probably not going to sell them anything if I sell them a final expense plan because we can't direct bill with most companies. Plus, it's just a pain, so don't even bother. So that's a condition. So if they get a bank account, game on. But if you look at final expense, because that's where most of my experience has been, the biggest objections to final expense is being able to have a need for it, as well as a desire. Do they love their family? Do they not want to screw them over with a burial expense? Do they health qualify? That's easy in this day and age, especially if you're an independent agent. Do they have the bank account to draft, and do they have the money to do it? If I can overcome those first 5 objections, then usually it's smooth as butter at this point, and I don't get any objections. Now, if you're with me up to this point from the beginning, you'll notice need, want, bank, budget, and what did I forget? Health are my pre-qualification questions, okay? So, here's my point. No matter what it is that you're selling, think of all the objections that you experienced. And I need to think about it as BS, okay? There's another objection. We'll get to that in a second. There's a true core objection to that. They don't trust you, let's say. Or, they've got a brother in the business. Or they're completely happy. But these are things that once you identify what really matters, once you identify what the objections are that are most common with your product, then what you need to do is build your presentation, specifically your your pre-qualification and fact-finding section to eliminate those objections well in advance of getting to the actual close. So that's why I say the whole 5, 6, 7 objection rebuttals is BS, because you're not going to have to do that at this point if you followed my method, if you followed my system up to this point. You're probably not, they're going to run out of it. There's going to be no reason not to buy, except sometimes there is. Usually it stems around just complacency, not complacency as much as a lack of urgency. So all this is explained to you and shared because I want you to understand if you follow the system, you'll very rarely get objections. And if there are objections, then a lot of times you just go right back to what they told you they said they could do and hold them to their word. Okay, so let's say somebody says, I like what you had to say, Dave. This sounds really good, but let me think about it. I need to think about it. I don't buy anything from anybody on the first day. How do you handle that? Well, basic sales training and objection handling tells us that when you have somebody who needs to think about it, that is what we call a stalling tactic, okay? It is a true statement, but it's not a specific, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not the core reason. They have to think about something, and we want to know what that something is. And that's the goal of what we have to arrive to. So we have to figure out what that something is. And we've got to figure it out without putting pressure on them. So the process that I utilize here is as follows. I say, Mr. Jones, that is totally fine that you need to think about it. In fact, a lot of people that buy from me needed to think about this before they made their decision. However, when you say you need to think about it, how do you mean? Zip, be quiet. So let's go over this process. So I like this. It's again, I believe in processes, not remembering 20 different ways to say something. You got to remember one way to handle all sorts of objections. So this is a nice process you can use in any circumstance, whatever their objection is. So I say, hey, Mr. Jones, that's totally fine. So I affirm that it's okay to object, so that I'm not coming off and saying, no, that's not fine. I'm not being adversarial or high pressure, so I'm lowering their defenses because I want an honest conversation with them, okay? That's ultimately where I want to go. And then I say a lot of people who I've talked to needed to think about this just like you. So I give them third-party validation that thinking about it is okay in a certain context. And I also imply, if you notice subtly, that people who bought from me needed to think about it too. So I tell them that it's okay because you're probably going to buy from me anyway. And those people who bought from me thought about it too. So you're in good company. Now, what I say after that is I say, but when you say, I don't like to say but, I like to say and. It's a little less of a negative word. And when you say that you need to think about it, how do you mean? So when I say how do you mean, this is important. You have to answer these stalls with an open-ended question. And the reason is that an open-ended question will draw out, it will smoke out the true objection, as I learned from a Cintas uniform salesman. You got to smoke out the objection because there's always more to it than what meets the eye. And so when I ask them how do they mean, then they can give me, hopefully, if they're decent, honest people, the true objection that they're objecting with. Maybe it's, I need to, I just can't afford it this month. This is too expensive. So that's great. I love hearing that because maybe they're telling me that they want this, but there's no money. So now I can rebuttal it. Again, now I have an opportunity to close the deal down and show them a proposition that is win-win for both of us. So that's the setup. Now, the proposition, I use this phraseology because I'm trying to, again, I think of myself as an assistant buyer. And when I make a proposition to them, I'm trying to show them a way that they can get what they want without worrying about this objection and how that this is a good idea and they need to take advantage of it. Again, all without using pressure. So let's say I have somebody who says, I like what you have to show me, but I can't afford it now. I'll say, Mr. Jones, that's great. So what you're telling me, so I'll reiterate it back to them. I'll say, so what you're telling me is that your main concern really is about price. So a lot of times I'll just use the same, I use similar words, but not exactly a mirror image. So I'll say, you're just concerned about starting payments this month, and then he'll say, yeah, okay, great. So besides the starting payments, Is there any other reason that would stop you from making a decision to buy today? So this is a way to isolate the objection. So when I say that phrase, what I'm hoping to do is just to make sure there's no other concerns. So there's no other concerns that are causing you to halt on going forward. And if they say no, and usually they do, as I say, great. So let me make a proposition to you. If I can show you a way where we can start your plan, but you wouldn't have to pay this month, but could definitely start it next month when you've got your budget, when you're comfortable doing this, can you see this as a way that we can still do business? And then shut up and then let them answer. If they say no, I'll ask them, well, how do you mean? So then I'll start the whole process over again. Likely if we kind of go back and forth like this, they're dodging me, they're not committed, they're not sharing something, I'll try to hit on that at the very end. But the idea behind this is now I can come up with a win-win solution where I can come in and say, okay, here's my proposition. Let's do the paperwork, let's get you qualified. Let's see if we can even get you qualified. Kind of a slight takeaway because we don't even know, right, if we sell any kind of insurance, if they qualify until they go through medical underwriting, unless you're doing something like Medicare open enrollment. I get that. But, let's just see if we can qualify you. And the great thing is once you're qualified, we can set this up so we don't need the money today. We can set this up next month. How does that sound to you? Can we do business? So that way I'm overcoming that objection. Oh, okay, yeah, that's fine with me. And then I proceed on. So that's how I deal with that objection. And that's the process I use. So let me go over it one more time. When somebody objects, no matter what the objection is, I say, I see, Mr. Jones, so what you're saying, or excuse me, let's say the object, blah, 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 I need to think about it. Mr. Jones, is totally fine. A lot of people who buy policies from me say the same thing that you do. They need to think about it, and that's fine. However, my question to you, Mr. Jones, is when you say you need to think about it, how do you mean? Shut up, let them answer, and I'll say, okay, when you're telling me it's the sticking point, what you're basically saying is the sticking point here is about price. Is that right? Yes, that's right. Okay. So besides price, is there any other reason that would prevent you from doing business with me today? No. Okay. So here's my proposition. Let's say I can get you a policy without having to take a premium this month. I could start it next month instead. Can we do business if I can make that happen? That's kind of a bare bones. I could kind of fluff it up a little bit more. I could say something like, well, so here's my proposition. I know you don't want to pay this month. I totally understand. What if we set it up for next month? That way your budget's set up, your money's coming in, you know it's there, you're not under pressure, and you still get this insurance that you really, really want. If that makes sense, can we do business today? Sure. And then you've just basically explained, perfect. So let me do the paperwork, let's get you approved, because I don't know if I can get you approved, and then we'll start payment next month. Fair enough? So that's how you rebuttal those objections. Again, one thing I'll add here, guys, I have found this out through doing this process. Basically, I've done the same process probably since 2012, so we're talking 6 years, thousands of final expense presentations. I've used this process exclusively. We rely on the trustworthiness of our prospect to tell us the truth. Now, this particular method has a funny way of fleshing out the losers and deadbeats that are wasting your time, that aren't telling you the truth. So you'll flush out a lot of them, but it's not foolproof. There's no system that doesn't have holes in it or weaknesses. And many times you'll run in, not many times, I take that back, not many times, but sometimes you'll run into circumstances to where you'll follow this method and people just won't be forthright and honest with you. And I have yet to figure out a way to get forthright or people who are dodgy, flaky liars to be honest with you. And you get a better sense of this as you do this. In the beginning, you're just doing it. But as you begin to become an expert on sales, you simultaneously become an expert on human behavior. And you can kind of see the tells in people when they're just not being honest. And so I say this to you because don't expect perfection with this method. Like, oh no, I don't have to deal with objections anymore. You're still going to have to. But you got to think, and I think Tim Winder said this, who's a great final expense agent. He said, you got to create internal tension in the client, not apply pressure. And when I say create internal tension, what I mean by that is that you've got to hit on the importance of why this is really a good deal for your client, why they're doing this. You got to remind them, especially as you're closing the deal, that this is exactly what you want. You get the same great protection at $1,000 less than what you're spending for your current Medicare supplement. It's a great deal. It's standardized. You're not putting yourself at risk. You just have the luxury of the same coverage at a less price. So you want to go with this, or would this be better? Plan G, save a little more money. So with the setup, you want to make sure you hit on these high points. And even in the rebuttals, you can add that in. Hey, look, you're telling me you want to do this. Let's do this, and we don't have to take money. You save all this money. You don't have to deal with the frustrations of endless price increases anymore. Can we do business? So you want to hit on those high notes. Now, I'm saying all this not for pressure, but and you're not pressuring them because you're literally, again, utilizing their hot button words that they mentioned earlier, right? You're just telling them what they told you, which is why it's so important to be so effective at pre-qualifying. But still, you'll go through all this, and some people just won't budge, and I find that those people I usually just miss something in my presentation. I'll give you a real quick example. When I was pre-qualifying this one lady, probably 3 or 4 years ago on final expense, she told me, when I asked for a budget, I said, could you afford somewhere between $60 and $80 a month? She said, yeah, I think I can. That was my error. Now, for you guys listening, where was the error? Well, I think I can is not a positive, certain statement. It is a subjective, possible statement, right? There's room for error when I say I think I can. That means they have doubt. And I didn't catch that. And I went through my whole presentation, and I tried closing her, and she's like, yeah, I need to think about this. Yeah, I need to think about this. Okay, well, what if we start with a little less coverage instead? That's not good enough. Oh, I need to talk to my brother about it. And there's all this BS. And I left, and I thought, this sucks, man. I should have closed that. She was rock solid. And we were talking. I said, my ride-along guy I was riding with, he said, yeah, she sounded like she said she's a good thing. She said the budget could fit. And I said, that's what I did wrong. It's exactly what I did wrong. What I should have said to that was, if you're saying you think you can, Mrs. Jones, that means you probably can't. That's what most people have said when they think they can. They're just not 100% sure, and that's fine. Let's say we start you off somewhere between 40 and 50 a month. Do you know 100% sure that would fit your budget? Yes, that would fit. So a lot of the times, the objections you get are because you didn't qualify them earlier on. And in many times, you could have qualified them out and not even done the presentation. So a lot of the process that slips through the cracks here is because you didn't do a good job up front pre-qualifying. That's why I think pre-qualifying is way more important than closing, because that's where really you find out if your person's highly likely to buy or not. And if you got a forthright person, you'll be able to tell with specific and kind of intangibleness that they're buyers. And you'll be able to tell those who aren't either. And you'll just be able to end the sales presentation that much faster. So that's closing for you guys. I hope you do enjoy this. Wow, I got 21 viewers. That's a lot. It's more than I think I've had in a long time. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, got some practical advice out of this deal. Again, for you guys that are jumping on the stream here, some last tidbits of advice. This video is not complete on its own, okay? This video is not, if you go back and watch this was not about the 20 different objection handling techniques you can use. For the record, I think it's a waste of time to spend your time trying to learn the Ben Franklin close, the Colombo close, the comparison close, all that BS. It's not worth the time. What you need to understand is not closes, is not phrases. You need to understand human psychology, and you need to understand a process. And I teach this sales process on the other 4 videos I did. If you go look at my videos and my YouTube channel and you just scroll back, you'll see rapport and introduction. You'll see pre-qualifying and fact-finding. And this is all very recently within the last week or 2. And then you'll see presenting your product. To really understand why closing isn't as important as you probably have been told it is, you have to take in the first 3 videos. Because you have to think of yourself in a funnel, okay? You put you open your sales at the top of the funnel, and that funnel gets closer and closer near the bottom. It narrows, right? Well, as it narrows, some of this stuff is going to get filtered out, these deals. And when you're closing, you're just closing the people that 90% of the time are going to buy because you've done a good job figuring out if they're a buyer or not. So again, it's the entire process that's important. You don't want to spend your time learning just closes in this business. You want to understand why people do what they do. Why do they buy? Why do they think they want a policy? If they've got one, why do they like it? If they got one, why don't they like it? What do they not like about it? Have they bought from an insurance agent before? How did it go? What was good about it? What was bad about it? What do you want to accomplish with your life insurance plan? Why did you buy a Medicare supplement and not a Medicare Advantage plan? How do you feel about what if you die and your spouse is left to pay this mortgage and replace your income? What would happen? These are the most powerful questions that give you all the answers you ever need to figure out if this person's going to buy or not. Because the quality of the answers to the questions that you give them, the quality of those answers determine really if these people care enough about spending money on something, let's face it, they'll never see. Life insurance is a weird product, okay? Like I'm spending money on a policy right now for myself that I won't see. Like I have to keel over and die and be gone forever for anybody to get benefit. I don't even know if it's going to happen. I just trust that it does. And so I have to have enough love and concern about my people, my family, to shell out the kind of money on a life insurance policy that I do consistently, monthly after a month. And I have to have a damn good reason to do it because the nature of this kind of product, especially life insurance, not so much Medicare or health insurance or any kind of a product where you can see the tangibility of it immediately. It's hard to sell people on that stuff. So they've got to have the internal stuff inside of them. But either way, the questions you ask early on are going to lead you to more powerful conclusions. They're going to help you sell better. They're going to help you close better because you're going to be using their own words. You know, they're providing you the ammo on the close to wrap up the close and sell the deal so that you don't have to like try to figure out what they want. You just listen to what they tell you and then present it to them in their own language based on and focus on the main things that are a concern to them. So my name is Dave Duford at Final Expense Agent Mentor. If you enjoyed this video, if this is your first video watching, two things I'd like you to do. First of all, give me the old thumbs up if you don't mind, as well as subscribe to this channel. I do about usually 5 videos a week on all sorts of topics related to insurance sales. So that can be prospecting, marketing, closing like today, selling, different types of interviews with different top producing agents. There's a lot of stuff for all insurance agents. If you're concerned about becoming a better insurance agent, then subscribe to this channel. You're going to get a ton of resources out of it. And if you're interested in working for my organization or you're interested to hear what I have to offer, go to feagentmentor.com. You can send me a message at feagentmentor.com/contact if you'd like to know more about my mentorship program. And feel free to comment or leave questions below. I love replying to everybody that has them. My name is Dave Duford. You guys, take care. We'll see you later. Bye.